the only cards I brought. You could have wished for anything, Secret Agent Ned.
Good luck, Agent Ned.
Yeah, you're gonna need it.
There was not a single show on Nick that matched the pace and energy of Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide. There also wasn't a kid on the planet that couldn't have used that survival guide at least once. Neds Declassified was, at its core, educational television. It held and carried with it all of the tropes, motifs, and structure of any show you might have caught on Saturday morning on PBS. Yet it managed to twist and reinvent those tropes, to break a genre of television and turn it into something nearly unrecognizable. It created its own subgenre. It became pure entertainment within a structure that its audience had grown out of. Neds was a show about kids, for kids, that entertained and became almost unrealistically relatable. It was phenomenal. And there was one episode throughout the show's 52-episode, 3-season run that really exemplified just why so many people still talk about the show today. But a little background is necessary for context. This is Butch Hartman. He is the creator of The Fairly OddParents. He also viewed that show and all of his creations as shows that taught the values he believed to be important in life. Things like family, honesty, growth. Butch didn't believe he was just creating cartoons. He believed he was part of molding his audience. Insert Scott Fellows. He would be a lead writer on Fairly OddParents from season 2 to season 7. He would eventually create a show for Teen Nick. A show in which a kid creates a guide for surviving school. That show would become Neds. The influence of Butch Hartman was clear, but here, Fellows pushed the boundaries of those ideas, and the result was a show that was grounded in balance.
What about that study hall? I mean, we don't study in the hall. We should call it study room.
It starts with relatability. Every episode of the show is named after a problem. If you scroll through that episode list and don't find an issue you had to deal with, you weren't human. This episode is the very first. It's called First Day. It combines a list of situations every kid ends up in with absolute nonsense. See, First Day exists in the structure of a teach me something show. Ned stares at the camera time and again and does stuff like this.
And remember, September is still summer, so hold off wearing the new fall fashions and heavy coat.
But First Day plays with that overt fourth wall messaging to create relatable fantasy. Every kid has wanted to be in the same elective as their friends. Every kid has tried to switch their schedule around by lying and flattering, and every kid has turned his first day into a fashion show. But this episode would be miserable to watch if it was simply another episode of Degrassi. Instead, to solve these problems, we see Cookie dressed in this, because
chicks dig the fluffy color.
We see Ned and Cookie try to switch their classes by hacking into the school's database, and we see Mose end up driving a foot-long nail through the hand of a shop teacher who has a single prosthetic finger. Relatable problems, absolutely absurd results. But because of this, it all plays out as pure entertainment, even when it's trying to tell its audience something, even when it has something to say. Ned's only succeeds in this way because of its relatively advanced humor that lays its foundation in both style and narrative. In Daydreaming, for example, Ned has to solve a word problem in order to get to lunch because too much of the class hasn't paid attention. And so he does this by dreaming these guys up.
Hey, Wanda, I've got an idea. How about we help out Secret Agent Ned?
Which is funny, but what's far funnier and a tad riskier for the time is stuff like this.
And we now have an odd number of boys, so you two will be the alternative family. Oh, here's your baby.
It's a girl.
This moment in First Day is a great example of trusting your audience's intelligence and writing a more mature joke as a result of that trust. Something so many Teen Nick shows fail to do consistently, and it almost had to. Part of what made the show unique is that unlike most scripted live action shows, or nearly all of them at the time, Ned's episodes were 11 minutes long. And in 11 minutes, they introduced and closed the door on multiple storylines, all in half the time that every other live action show on the network was working with. It led to a blitzingly fast-paced show. That pace, in turn, forced the humor in bizarre situations. Given that massive problems had to be solved in just minutes, the only way out was often absurdity. The fact that the humor stayed mostly in line with its viewers and trusted them in that context was impressive. And sure, there were moments like these. But they're mashed in between moments where the kids realize they're hitting puberty and moments where Ned draws a not-so-clothed portrait of a woman in art class. Trust your audience, and you can write humor that meets them at eye level, as opposed to talking above or below their heads. And First Day was able to do this in the context of introducing the characters for the first time, and that's all the more impressive. But the guide always comes back around, and eventually, the episode arrives here.
So I guess the only way to be really ready for the first day is realize that nobody's ready.
With Ned giving a tip that encompasses the lessons learned throughout the episode. And I think what's most unique about Ned's is that in more circumstances than you might expect, these tips were valuable real-life advice. Take this tip.
No class is ever full. It just reaches capacity. And to get in, all you need is teacher approval.
Anyone that's ever been to any level of schooling knows this to be unbelievably true, and that a little bit of this
Cooking class is not our passion, it's wood shop. We love wood.
can get you into just about any class. The actual information Ned's presented, especially rewatching it, really makes it feel as though it was written by kids still going through these things. I can't tell you how helpful the sit near the door tip would have been if my brain had been able to conjure it in high school. And this is important because without this attempt to, however superficially, provide some level of insight, Ned's would blend in far too much with the rest of Teen Nick's offering at the time. It would literally be the same show as Emma Roberts' Unfabulous, for example. The guide drove so much of the humor and created a flavor unlike anything else. The goal of nearly all programming on these networks during this era had shifted to pure entertainment, but Ned remained grounded thanks to the very guide that drove that show's narrative. As a kid, it's a funny gimmick. After living it, it's remarkably real. But under the surface of all of that, every bit of it becomes secondary to what both First Day and Ned's in its entirety accomplished. At its core, Ned's was a show about growing up, and one that didn't take that process too seriously. It addressed the issues, relationships that end due to moves, bullying, body changes, and most importantly, maturing. But it does it without the drama. In First Day, Mose tries to make new friends because she's getting too old to talk to Ned and Cookie about everything, and that process is, well, all the nonsense you've seen thus far. Its final accomplishment was not taking itself seriously, ever, at all. There's almost no drama, no deaths, no heart-tugging moments, no tears, just pure weasel-chasing lunacy.
How dare you? What did I do? How dare you not remember what you did? Who are you?
Neds took a format, a structure, an in-your-face, here's the message of this episode approach that was typically reserved for educational television and turned that structure on its head. It was somehow, strangely, educational television for teens that simultaneously allowed you to turn your brain off. A total paradox. It created an informational, breakneck pot of insanity that resulted in one of the network's most entertaining and timeless pieces of teen programming. I was a bit worried, honestly, going back and watching it today about how well it might have aged, but it's still excellent. And First Day might not qualitatively be the best episode, but it put the show's strengths on display as best as any episode in its run did. It sounds absurd to say out loud, but I kind of wish my future kids could grow up alongside Ned and his friends. Most of these problems are still just as real today as they were when they aired the first time. I think every kid could use a page or two out of the school survival guide. Or at the very least, a friend with these glasses, because good lord, imagine the problems these glasses could have solved when your first day of school ends like this.
And again, don't wear the fluffy coat.
Well, that is it on today's episode of Nerdstalgic. If you did enjoy the video and you want to see more content like Ned's, come to the channel, press the like button. If you want to make sure you see everything that I put out here, press subscribe, and also maybe hit the little bell. It'll make sure you're notified when I actually release a video. So yeah, press subscribe and hit the bell if you haven't yet done so. On screen right now are 2 more episodes of Nerdstalgic if you want to check those out. And I will see you guys in the next episode.